If you'd told me a year ago that my mother would be dancing at my sister's boyfriend's surprise party while I walked down the aisle without her, I would have laughed. If you'd told me that the same woman who skipped my wedding would later beg me to have it again so she could attend, only after finding out I'm getting all of my aunt and uncle's inheritance, I would have said that sounded like bad television, not my real life. But here we are. My name is Riley, I'm 28, and a few months ago, I married the man I love in a small, beautiful ceremony. There were fairy lights, candles in glass jars, soft music, and the quiet buzz of people who truly cared about us. My aunt and uncle cried proud tears. My dad walked me down the aisle, and there was an empty chair where my mother should have been. While I was standing at the end of that aisle, holding Jake's hands and trying not to cry off my makeup, my phone, tucked away in a friend's clutch, was quietly filling up with social media notifications. Photos, videos. My mother, in a sparkly dress, laughing with a drink in her hand. My younger sister Elaine, pressed against her boyfriend, blowing out candles on a cake. People cheering, confetti in the air. A banner behind them. Happy birthday, Liam. Except it wasn't his birthday, it was my wedding day. My sister had scheduled her boyfriend's long-delayed surprise party on the exact date of my wedding, and my mother chose to go there instead. She didn't even call me that morning. No text, no, I'm sorry, no, good luck. Just music and laughter and clinking glasses in someone else's celebration, while I took a deep breath, fixed my veil myself, and told my reflection, "You're not alone. You have the people who actually show up." I wish the story ended there, with me hurt, but clear about who my family really was. But destiny has a dark sense of humor, because the same aunt and uncle who practically raised me, who stood in the front row at my wedding with eyes shining, later told my mother something she never expected. They were leaving everything to me. Their house, their savings, their entire inheritance. And suddenly, the woman who couldn't be bothered to show up at my wedding started calling every day, crying, apologizing. "Let's do a small ceremony again, sweetie," she begged over the phone. "Just family this time. I want to see you walk down the aisle. I deserve a chance to make it right." But her voice only echoed one thing in my head. "You didn't care when it was about me. You only care now that there's money involved." This is the story of how I became the black sheep of my own family, how my sister's boyfriend's party mattered more than my marriage, and how a will, a stack of legal papers with my name on it, forced every hidden crack in our family to finally split open. It started long before the wedding, long before the inheritance. It started the day my parents decided my aunt and uncle would raise me instead of them. I didn't become the black sheep overnight. In my family, it was more like a slow, quiet sorting that started before I was old enough to spell my own name. I'm 28 now, but the first 6 years of my life didn't belong to my parents at all. They belonged to my aunt and uncle. When I was born, my parents were a mess. Financially, emotionally, and in every way that actually matters when you have a newborn. My mom went through severe postpartum depression. I didn't know that word back then, of course. All I knew was what my aunt later told me. Mom couldn't get out of bed, couldn't stop crying, couldn't look at me without drowning in guilt and fear. So my aunt and uncle took me in. No drama, no long speeches. They just showed up, held me, fed me, rocked me to sleep. They already had their own quiet life, and they folded me into it like I'd always been meant to be there. For the first years of my life, I thought they were my parents. I called them Mom and Dad. I slept in a small, cozy room with yellow curtains and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I learned to read curled up on my aunt's lap. My uncle taught me how to strum on a tiny guitar, his big hands guiding my small, clumsy fingers across the strings. I didn't know there was another family out there thinking of me as temporarily away. Things started to shift when I was old enough for school. That's when my biological parents began visiting more regularly. They would show up at my aunt and uncle's house with a little girl in tow, my younger sister, Elaine. I remember the first time they explained it to me. "These are your real parents," my aunt said gently, her voice steady even though her eyes were wet. "And this is your little sister, Elaine." My real parents. As a kid, those words cracked my world in half. They'd visit for a few hours at a time, bringing snacks, asking polite questions, acting like guests who already knew they didn't have to stay long. I remember being excited at first. I wanted them to like me. I wanted Elaine to like me. But every visit ended the same way. They would pack up. They would gather their things. They would take Elaine by the hand, and then they would leave, without me. I'd stand in the doorway with my aunt's hand on my shoulder, watching the car drive away. I never saw Elaine look back. According to them, it was all temporary. According to my heart, it felt like being picked and then unpicked, over and over again. When I turned 6, the temporary ended. My parents decided it was time to bring me home. I remember sitting on my small bed, my aunt folding my clothes, my uncle carrying boxes, both of them trying to smile and promising, "We're not going anywhere. You can call us any time. We'll visit. We love you." I believed them, but I also believed I was going to a place called home. Home turned out to be a house where I was already behind. Elaine had never had to share anything in her life, not attention, not space, not our parents. She had her own room, her own routines, her own invisible ranking as the real daughter who stayed. When I moved in, there was a spare bedroom my parents could have given me. Instead, they insisted I share a room with Elaine so we could bond as sisters. Elaine hated it. She didn't hide it. If I read the books my aunt and uncle had bought me, she'd roll her eyes and call me a nerd. If I tried to hang up a drawing above my side of the bed, she'd scoff and say it looked childish. When I practiced the little guitar my uncle had given me, she'd tell me I sounded terrible and should stop before I embarrassed myself. Every piece of the life I had before, the hobbies, the small joys, the things that made me feel like me, became ammunition. I started shrinking myself down to fit. I stopped reading at home, only at school. I stopped playing guitar at all. I spoke less at dinner. I made myself smaller and quieter, hoping maybe if I took up less space, my sister would tolerate me and my parents would see me. Instead, my parents treated my discomfort like a character flaw. When Elaine mocked my acne, called me disgusting, I went to my mom in tears. She didn't hug me. She didn't tell Elaine to stop. She just sighed and told me I needed to toughen up and stop tattling. Dad stayed mostly silent, orbiting the edge of every conflict like a moon that refused to affect the tide. My aunt and uncle, when they visited, noticed. They pulled Elaine aside. They told her to be kinder, to stop picking on me. But Elaine never listened. She knew who the favorites were and who they weren't. As I grew older, the imbalance only became more obvious. Elaine was popular at school. I was the angry teenager learning how to stand up for myself because no one else ever did. When she spread rumors about me, I confronted her. When she lied to our parents, I told the truth. Somehow, I still ended up being the one scolded for starting drama. But the real proof of where I ranked came during my high school graduation. I had worked so hard. Late nights, extra credits, honors. I imagined looking into the crowd, finding my parents' faces, seeing them smile just for me. Instead, a few days before the ceremony, my mom casually announced that Elaine had a dance recital scheduled on the same day. The events were hours apart, but somehow my sister's full dress rehearsal needed them more. "Your dad will be there for you," Mom promised. On the day of my graduation, even he didn't show. Apparently, Elaine had a panic attack before her rehearsal, and my mom called my dad, insisting he rush over to calm her down. So when I walked across that stage, when I took my diploma with shaking hands and forced a smile for the cameras, there was no one in the audience for me. No familiar faces, no wild clapping, just rows of strangers and a hollow, echoing ache in my chest. That night, they came home late, laughing, celebrating Elaine's big day. They hugged her, praised her, told her how proud they were. No one even apologized for missing mine. That was the moment something inside me quietly snapped. From then on, I stopped asking my parents to show up, stopped telling them when I achieved anything. The only people I shared my good news with were my aunt and uncle, the same two people who had held me first, loved me first, and never made me feel like an afterthought. And they would be the ones, years later, to change everything with a single decision in their will. By the time I reached my early 20s, the roles in my family were so fixed it felt like we were all reading from a script. Elaine, the golden child. Mom, her fierce protector and biggest fan. Dad, the quiet shadow backing whatever Mom said. Me, the eldest daughter, visible only when convenient. But even with all that history, the next phase of conflict didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Small, sharp pieces I mostly ignored, because that's what being the black sheep teaches you to do. You learn to endure the little cuts because the big wounds already scarred you long ago. It started around the time I met Jake. I was 24 then, working at a tech company, settling into a life that finally felt like mine. He was a software engineer, kind, steady, the sort of man who listened carefully and spoke honestly. From the very beginning, Jake made me feel seen in a way my own family never had. The first time I introduced Jake to my parents, I dressed nicely, rehearsed answers to imaginary questions, and prayed, like a child, that maybe this time they'd be proud of my choices. They weren't. Mom's eyes swept over Jake like she was assessing a defective product. Dad shook his hand politely, but without enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Elaine's boyfriend, who had dropped out of college and didn't yet have a job, was treated like royalty. I just worry, Mom said afterward, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. He seems very career-focused, not very family-oriented. Don't you want someone who will put you first? Translation. Jake had boundaries. Jake had opinions. Jake didn't fold under passive-aggressive comments the way Elaine's boyfriend did. Every family dinner became a battlefield disguised as small talk. Mom would say something like, "A real man prioritizes family time over work." Jake would answer calmly, "A balance is important. Providing for a family is also an act of love." She'd purse her lips. Elaine would smirk. Dad would pretend not to hear. After a few months, invitations stopped including Jake's name altogether. "We don't want things to feel too crowded," Mom said once. Too crowded, except when Elaine and her boyfriend were involved. I stopped going to family gatherings. And, unsurprisingly, no one seemed to mind. But the Hat Mam's sungdot, the seed of the real disaster, was planted the day Jake proposed. He planned a simple, intimate moment. Just the two of us, on a quiet hiking trail, the sunset painting everything gold. He dropped to one knee with shaking hands and said, "Riley, you're my future. Please marry me." I cried. I said yes. I felt like every wound from my childhood was suddenly worth it because it led me to someone who chose me wholeheartedly. I told my parents out of courtesy because despite everything, I still held some fragile hope they'd be happy for me. Dad congratulated me warmly. Mom didn't. Later that night, she texted, "I'm disappointed. I told you he isn't the right fit for our family." I asked her why, what real reason she had for disliking Jake. Her answer was infuriatingly revealing. "He challenges my opinions. Elaine's boyfriend never does that." Jake wasn't rude, he was assertive. But in my family, disagreement was treated as defiance. And defiance was something only I was guilty of, apparently. Then came another cut. Elaine didn't congratulate me. Not in a text, not in a call, not in any way. Still, I invited her to the wedding. Because I didn't want to be the problem. Because I wanted peace. Because I had hope, stupid or not. 2 months later, when invitations went out, what happened next should have told me everything. Elaine declined. No explanation, no apology, just a flat, "Can't make it." The disappointment was real, but manageable. What came afterward, though, that was the beginning of the avalanche. Dad called me, hesitant, like he knew the words would hurt. "Your mom won't be attending the wedding. Going to Elaine's boyfriend's surprise party instead." I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, numb. "His birthday is months away," I whispered. "I know," Dad said softly. "I'm sorry." It didn't make sense. It didn't logically connect. But emotionally, it was the same old story. Mom chose Elaine. Again, and again, and again. I reached out to Elaine for clarity. Her explanation was casual, almost bored. They didn't have enough money to throw him a party on his actual birthday. She finally found a venue they could afford. That date, the same date as my wedding, was the only one available. Her boyfriend's happiness came above everything else. Everything else, including my marriage, including me. She hung up before I could respond. Mom defended her. "Don't be selfish. Your dad is going to your wedding. Elaine would be hurt if I didn't attend her party." In that moment, something inside me quietly folded inward. Not broken, not surprised, just done. But neither I nor my mother knew that this moment, her choosing my sister's boyfriend's party over her own daughter's wedding, would echo all the way into inheritance papers, hospital rooms, and a vow renewal none of us saw coming. The seed was planted, the ground was shifting, and the real earthquake was on its way. I wish I could say the moment everything truly broke was something dramatic. Slammed doors, screaming matches, lightning cracking in the sky. But the real breaking point came quietly. It came dressed as a wedding day. A day that should have been about love, vows, and new beginnings. But instead revealed exactly where I stood in my own family. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with butterflies in my chest, equal parts joy and fear. The air felt delicate, like something sacred was about to happen. I put on soft music, brewed coffee, and let the warm sunlight spill across the room as if the universe itself wanted to bless the day. My dress hung on the closet door, shimmering in the light. Jake had written me a note the night before, 4 simple lines that made my heart swell. See you at the end of the aisle. I've never been more certain of anything. I held that note to my chest and breathed in the moment. I was ready. Or at least I thought I was. Around 9 a.m., my dad texted, "I'm on my way." A simple message, but it calmed me. At least one parent would be there. At least someone would walk me down the aisle. But 30 minutes later, when I checked my phone again, there were dozens of notifications lighting up my screen. Photos, videos, stories. All of them tagged with my sister's username. My thumb hovered over the screen and my stomach turned even before I tapped the first video. There she was, Elaine, in a sparkly dress, laughing, holding her boyfriend's hand. Behind them, a big glittering sign. "Happy birthday, Liam!" Confetti cannon blasts. People cheering. The music loud and joyful. But what gutted me wasn't the party. It was the next video. My mother at the center of the dance floor, swirling under neon lights, hair flying, drink in hand, laughing like she hadn't a single responsibility in the world. On my wedding day, the day she had deliberately chosen to miss. My breath caught. My chest tightened as if someone had reached inside and clenched their fist around my heart. I stared at the screen, my reflection ghosted over the video, my eyes wide, my veil half pinned, my makeup halfway done. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too small. My hands trembled as I locked my phone. I pressed it to my thigh as if I could trap the heartbreak inside me before it spilled everywhere. My bridesmaid Claire saw the color drain from my face. "Riley, what happened?" I swallowed hard, the words sticking like glass in my throat. "She's not coming," I whispered. "My mom, she's at the party, the one Elaine planned." Claire's eyes widened with a mix of disbelief and fury. "She what?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I walked toward the full-length mirror and stared at myself, my curled hair, my soft makeup, the delicate lace already hugging my shoulders. I looked like a bride, but I felt like a child abandoned at the school doors all over again. The younger version of me, the 6-year-old who watched her parents drive away with Elaine, rose up from the shadows of memory and stood beside my reflection, and I felt her heartbreak echo through me. Claire touched my arm gently. "Do you want to call her?" I shook my head. I already know her answer. "But my dad would still be there. He said he would." 15 minutes later, he arrived. When he stepped into the room, his eyes softened. Pride and guilt and love all tangled together. "Sweetheart," he breathed. "You look absolutely beautiful." I hugged him, holding on a little too tightly. His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry your mom isn't here." That was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging the imbalance of my childhood. And it was enough. Just for that moment, it was enough. The rest of the preparations blurred by in a haze. Lipstick fixes, veil adjustments, last-minute checks. Then came the ceremony. As I stood at the end of the aisle, facing Jake, my Jake, steady and warm and completely present, I felt a wave wash over me. Not sadness, not bitterness. Something quieter. Resolve, strength. I was marrying a man who chose me every day, and I was stepping away from a family who never had. But the true B&Co, the real inciting incident, didn't arrive until after the wedding, when my aunt and uncle, furious at my mother's blatant absence, told her they were leaving all of their inheritance to me. Every penny, every asset, everything. My mother's reaction was instant. Not regret, not shame, not an apology for missing my wedding, but panic, fear, desperation. And suddenly, she wanted a second wedding. Suddenly, she wanted to make things right. Suddenly, she wanted me. That moment, when her voice trembled not with love, but with fear of losing money, was when I realized the true breaking point of our relationship. For the first time in my life, I had something she wanted, and she would do anything to get it back. For days after the wedding, I lived in 2 parallel realities. One was soft, warm, glowing. The memory of Jake's hands in mine, the vows we whispered, the quiet joy of knowing I had chosen the right man. The other was cold, sharp, a hollow echo of an empty chair that should have been filled by my own mother. Whenever I thought about her, my chest tightened with a familiar mixture of shame and longing, because even now, even after everything, a part of me still wished she'd shown up. I hated that part of myself. I wanted to be stronger than that, But wounds formed in childhood have a way of bleeding long into adulthood. 3 days into our honeymoon, my aunt called. I could hear the fury in her voice before she said a word. "Riley, your mother." We confronted her. I froze mid-step onto the hotel balcony. What happened? My aunt took a breath, steady but shaking. "We told her we were done watching her treat you this way. We told her we are leaving everything to you. The house, the savings, all of it." The words hit me harsher than I expected. Aunt and uncle had always been loving, but this was a declaration, a line drawn in permanent ink. But before I could even process the weight of it, she continued, "Your mother didn't apologize. She didn't even mention the wedding. She accused us of trying to steal her daughter again. And then she demanded we reconsider the will." Of course she did, of course. Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you," not, "I wish I had been there," just panic over money. After I hung up, Jake stepped beside me. The wind ruffled the sleeves of his shirt, and he studied my face with quiet concern. "What did they say?" I swallowed. "My mom knows about the inheritance. She's upset, very upset." Jake let out a slow breath. "Riley, you don't owe her anything." But a knot in my chest tightened. I don't know how to just ignore her. She's still my mother. He reached for my hand, grounding me. "And you're still the daughter she didn't bother showing up for." His words weren't cruel, they were true. And hearing them spoken aloud felt like pressing on a bruise I'd been pretending didn't exist. That night, after Jake fell asleep, I stepped onto the balcony again. The ocean wind was cool, brushing my cheeks like a soft warning. I pulled out my phone and stared at my mother's missed calls, 7 of them. 7 calls while I was supposed to be celebrating the happiest days of my life. Part of me felt guilty ignoring her. Part of me felt angry she thought she still deserved my attention. And part of me, the smallest, saddest part, felt tired. Tired of being the daughter who always forgave first. The next morning, I finally called her back. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was trembling, high-pitched, frantic. "Riley, sweetheart, thank God. You need to convince them. I can't lose my inheritance. You don't understand." There it was, not "I missed you," not "congratulations," not "you looked beautiful." Just money, as always money. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall. "Mom," I said quietly, "are you calling because you want to fix things with me, or because you're afraid of losing the inheritance?" Silence. A silence so heavy it felt like a confession. Then, "You can't expect me to just accept this. I am their family, not you. They're doing this to punish me. Riley, you have to talk to them. Tell them you don't want the money." A sharp, cold calm spread through me. For the first time in my life, her manipulation didn't confuse me. It didn't make me want to apologize. It made me angry. A deep, steady anger that felt like finally unlocking a door I had kept sealed for decades. "I'm not having another wedding so you can pretend you care," I whispered. She sputtered. "Another ceremony would show them you forgave me. It would restore peace. Why are you being so dramatic?" Dramatic. That word again. The same word she used when I cried as a child. The same word she used when she dismissed every hurt I ever expressed. Except now I wasn't a child anymore. "Mom," I said, voice trembling but firm, "you chose Elaine's boyfriend's party over my wedding. You chose her over me for 28 years. If you want to make things right, throwing another wedding isn't the answer. The answer is fixing you, not me." She started crying, begging, but for once her tears didn't move me. I felt guilty, yes, but I also felt something I had never felt before in a conversation with her: clarity. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. Jake walked over and wrapped his arms around me, no questions asked. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one chasing my mother's love. I was choosing myself. But choosing myself wasn't the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. Because when my mother realized tears and begging wouldn't move me, she escalated, Elaine escalated, and the entire family followed. The fallout hadn't begun yet, but the tremors were already shaking the ground beneath us. The weeks after that phone call felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every day, something new simmered, boiled, or threatened to explode. Family drama doesn't just happen. It spreads, seeping into every corner of your life until even the silence feels charged. At first, the escalation came through my phone. Missed calls, long texts, voice messages from my mother, her tone swinging wildly from tearful guilt to biting accusations. One text said, "Please, Riley, I just want another chance." Another said hours later, I don't understand why you're punishing me. And then, the next morning, you've changed. Jake has changed you. He's turning you against your own family. I stared at those words, pulse rising. Jake, the one anchor in my life, had become her scapegoat. When I showed him the messages, he rubbed a hand across his jaw, frustration tightening his eyes. She'll keep pushing because it's worked before, he said quietly. But you're drawing boundaries now. She just doesn't know how to handle it. He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make any of it easier. Then came Elaine. My sister had always been braver behind a screen than face to face, and her text proved that hadn't changed. You didn't have to involve Aunt and Uncle. Mom is terrified. You should fix this. A second wedding isn't a big deal. Just do it. Why are you being difficult? One message stung more than the rest. You know Mom never connected with you because you lived with Aunt and Uncle. You can't hold that against her forever. My hands went cold reading it. How easy it was for her to rewrite history, as if the years of favoritism, neglect, and dismissal had been a simple misunderstanding instead of a pattern that shaped my entire childhood. Jake saw my face pale as I read the message, and he took the phone gently from my hands. Riley, he said softly, you don't need to justify your pain to anyone, not even your sister. But I did try to justify it. I typed paragraph after paragraph, explaining myself, explaining the wounds, the missing graduation, the way I was treated like a guest in my own family, explaining what should have been obvious. I deleted every draft. Instead, I sent one message. I'm not having a second wedding. Please respect that. Elaine didn't reply. But the silence didn't mean peace. The next escalation came from my father. Dad had always been the quiet one, the man who hovered at the edges of conflict, hoping things would resolve themselves. But passivity can be its own damage. Sometimes silence hurts more than words. One evening he called. His voice was low, tired. Riley, your mother's very upset. I closed my eyes. Of course that's where he'd start. Not with, how are you? Not with, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Just concerned for her. What do you want me to do about that, Dad? I asked softly. A long pause. I imagined him running a hand through his thinning hair, searching for the right thing to say. I think maybe you could at least talk to her. She's your mother. She deserves... That word hit me like a slap. Deserves. Dad, I whispered, anger tightening the back of my throat. Did she deserve to be at my wedding? Because she chose not to be. Silence. Then a sigh. I know, sweetheart. But this inheritance, this is causing a lot of stress. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. So it's about the money then? No, he insisted quickly. Not just that, but maybe if you agreed to another ceremony, things could settle. There it was. Confirmation. My family wasn't trying to heal. They were trying to reset, to pretend my wedding day hadn't revealed exactly who they were. I ended the call gently, but firmly. Dad, I love you, but I'm not fixing a problem I didn't create. For days, the emotional air around me thickened. I felt watched, judged, pulled apart by the same loyalties that had defined my childhood. And then the escalation hit its peak. My aunt and uncle called me, voices tight with anger. Your mother came to our house, my aunt said sharply. She demanded to know why we were leaving everything to you. My stomach dropped. What? She showed up without calling? She said we were trying to buy your love, my uncle added, disbelief in his tone. Can you imagine, after the way she treated you all these years? I sank onto the couch, heart pounding. What did you say? My aunt didn't hesitate. I told her the truth, that we love you because you've earned that love 100 times over, that you're the one who was left behind, forgotten, dismissed, that this inheritance is not revenge, it's fairness. A tear slipped down my cheek. My aunt continued, her voice cracking with emotion. And then she threatened to contest the will. Contest it. Take them to court. Fight the people who had raised me when she couldn't. Jake slid onto the couch beside me, his arm wrapping around my shoulders as if he could physically shield me from their words. I took a shaky breath. I'm so sorry, I whispered to them. I never wanted any of this. My aunt's tone softened instantly. Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. But guilt still twisted inside me, heavy, suffocating, irrational, but real. Family conflict always finds the eldest daughter first, even when she isn't the cause. After the call, I leaned into Jake's chest, letting the tension finally break into quiet, exhausted tears. He stroked my hair gently. Riley, this isn't your burden to carry. Your mom is reacting to consequences she created. I know, I whispered. But knowing didn't stop the ache of being the daughter who caused earthquakes simply by existing. I started pulling away from everyone, muting group chats, letting calls go to voicemail, ignoring the texts that poured in like waves against a fragile shore, not because I didn't care, but because caring had become exhausting. But the universe wasn't done escalating things. My mother's panic was growing. Elaine's guilt was morphing into anger, and my aunt and uncle were preparing for a legal battle they didn't deserve. And then, in the middle of all this chaos, fate intervened in the most brutal way. A phone call, a hospital room, a heart attack. And suddenly, the woman who had never once shown up for me was lying in a hospital bed, asking for me by name. The escalation had reached its breaking point, but the breaking, as I would soon learn, was only the beginning. The night I learned my mother had a heart attack, something inside me fractured, not sharply, but quietly, like thin ice cracking under one more step than it could bear. Jake and I were still on our short getaway, trying to breathe after weeks of conflict. The ocean had been soothing that evening. We had walked along the sand, my hand tucked comfortably in his, the sky streaked with deep pink and orange. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Then my phone rang. Dad's name on the screen. He never called me unless something was wrong. My stomach sank before I even answered. Dad? His voice was tight, frayed at the edges. Riley, you need to come home. Your mom, she had a minor heart attack. She's stable now, but the doctors say she needs to avoid stress. Stress. The word felt ironic enough to make me dizzy. Jake put a steadying hand on my back as my knees went weak. Is she okay? I breathed. She's asking for you, Dad said softly. She really wants to see you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, and that caring had always been a wound I never knew how to close. Jake drove us home through the night. I stared out the window, the highway lights reflecting off the glass like moving stars. My chest felt tight, knotted with emotions I couldn't untangle. Anger, fear, guilt, love, broken and misshapen, but still there. How do you feel? Jake asked gently, his hand reaching across the console to hold mine. I didn't know how to answer. I don't think I'm ready to forgive her, I said quietly, but I don't want her to die thinking I hated her. He squeezed my hand. You can love someone and still protect yourself from them. When we reached the hospital the next morning, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and sterile. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and coffee. My heart hammered against my ribs as we approached her room. Elaine was already there. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back hastily. When she saw me, her expression flickered through surprise, guilt, resentment, then softened into something weary. She's awake, Elaine said quietly. She's been asking for you. My throat tightened. Is she okay? Elaine nodded, eyes glossy. Yeah, mostly scared, I think. I stepped inside. My mother looked small, breakable even. Her hair, usually styled and immaculate, lay limp around her face. Her complexion was pale, lips dry, eyes shadowed by fatigue. When she turned her head toward me, tears welled instantly. Riley. My name came out as a whisper, fragile and trembling. I froze at the foot of her bed. I felt 6 years old again, the girl waiting by the door, watching her parents drive away with Elaine in the back seat. Hi, Mom, I managed, my voice softer than I expected. She reached out a shaky hand. I hesitated for half a second, a reflex born of years of emotional whiplash, then stepped closer and took it in mine. Her grip tightened with surprising strength. I'm so sorry, she whispered, for everything, for the wedding, for all the years I wasn't there the way I should have been. My chest constricted. I had dreamed of hearing those words as a child, as a teenager, as an adult who kept trying to earn her love. Yet now, standing in this cold hospital room, all I felt was an overwhelming, crushing sadness. Not vindication, not triumph, just grief. Because the apology came at the edge of crisis, not out of understanding, but out of fear. She swallowed hard, wiping at her eyes. I didn't know how to be your mother after giving you to your aunt and uncle. I felt like I'd already failed you, and it was easier to hold on to Elaine than face what I did wrong. Each word pierced like a needle, precise and painful. I didn't want to lose you, she continued, voice cracking, but I didn't know how to get you back. I stood there, my vision blurring. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to walk out and never look back. Pain makes contradictions of all of us. Instead, I said the only honest words I could. I don't know how to forgive you yet. She nodded slowly, tears sliding into her hairline. I know, sweetheart. I just want a chance to try. Behind me, Jake stepped closer. Elaine sniffled softly in the corner. And for the first time in my life, our family stood in the same room with our wounds uncovered, like a collection of broken things finally acknowledging our cracks. But acknowledgement is not healing, not yet. As I left the room a little later, the weight of everything settled over me. The inheritance fight, my mother's collapse, Elaine's resentment, my father's passivity. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps echoing. Jake caught up to me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. You okay? He whispered. I shook my head, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. No, but maybe this is the bottom, and maybe now we can start climbing out. He kissed my temple gently. I'm right here with you, Riley. Every step. But even with his reassurance, I felt a terrifying truth settle deep in my chest. If my mother hadn't nearly died, she would have never apologized. And that realization cut deeper than anything she'd ever said or done. This was my darkest point, the moment I saw the truth bare, unsoftened, undeniable. My family loved me, but only when forced to confront what losing me might mean. If the heart attack was the moment everything cracked open, what came next was the moment everything shifted. Slowly, carefully, like the ground finally realizing it can no longer hold old fault lines in place. The first sign of that shift came during one of the early family therapy sessions my mother insisted on joining once she was discharged from the hospital. It was the first time the four of us, Mom, Dad, Elaine, and me, sat in a circle without pretending, without performing old roles. Our therapist, a calm woman with kind eyes, asked us to start by naming the feelings we carried into the room. I expected deflection, excuses, defensive rehearsed lines. But instead, my mother spoke first. I'm ashamed, she whispered. The room went still. Even Elaine looked startled. Mom took a shaky breath, clutching a tissue in both hands like it was the only thing grounding her. I thought I had time to fix things with Riley, time to be the mother I should have been. But when I felt that pain in my chest, all I saw were the years I wasted choosing the easy child over the one who needed me. Her voice cracked. I realized I loved her the most when I thought I was losing her. The honesty, raw, trembling, imperfect, hit me like a wave. Not because it healed anything, but because it was real, and real was something I rarely got from her. Elaine went next. She shifted uncomfortably before murmuring, I feel guilty. Her gaze flicked to me, quick, afraid, then steadying. I spent so many years trying to be the favorite because I thought that was the only way Mom would love me. And in doing that, I treated Riley like the competition. Even when I got older and knew better, I didn't stop. She swallowed hard. And when I missed your wedding, that wasn't about my boyfriend. That was about me wanting to stay in the role Mom gave me, the golden child. The therapist nodded gently. And what do you feel now? Elaine's voice wavered, like I don't deserve to be her sister. It was the first time in our entire lives she had ever admitted something so vulnerable. A small part of me softened, not forgiveness, but recognition. We had both been shaped by the same broken dynamic, just on opposite ends of the damage. When it was finally my turn, the therapist looked at me with a soft, steady patience. Riley, what do you feel? My hands trembled in my lap. I feel tired, I said, and angry, and sad, and all of that sits on top of this tiny, stupid hope that they'll finally choose me. But I also feel stronger for the first time in my life. I felt Jake's presence beside me, even though he wasn't physically in the room. His steady, grounding love, giving me the courage to speak without shrinking. I'm not the child hoping for their approval anymore, I said quietly. I'm the woman who built a life without it. The therapist nodded, her eyes warm. That shift you're feeling, that's power. Not dominance, not revenge. Power. The turning point came later, when the topic of the inheritance surfaced again. Mom wrung her hands, her voice faint. I'm not going to contest the will, she whispered. I'm letting it go. Elaine's head snapped towards her, surprised. Dad exhaled shakily, relief etched across his face. My mother continued, voice trembling but resolute. They made that choice because I failed Riley. I see that now, and I won't take away the one gesture of love they were trying to give her. The therapist asked gently, and what do you hope Riley hears in that decision? Mom turned toward me, eyes glossy. That I'm trying, even if I'm late. Something inside me loosened, not healed, not yet, but loosened, like a knot finally beginning to untangle. That night, after therapy, Jake and I sat on our couch, legs tangled, soft lamplight filling the room. He brushed a thumb over my hand. "How do you feel?" I inhaled deeply. Like, I finally have the space to choose what comes next. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of clarity. Jake pressed a kiss to my forehead. That's the woman I fell in love with. For the first time, the path forward didn't look like a battleground. It looked like a choice. My choice. Not to forget the past, but to stop letting it define the future. And that realization, that shift toward my own power, was the turning point that changed everything. Because once you stop waiting to be loved the right way, you finally begin to understand how much you deserve. Fallout doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like quiet consequences settling exactly where they belong, on the people who created them. In the months following therapy, something shifted in the atmosphere of our family. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, in the way gravity pulls everything back to its rightful place. My mother, who once wielded denial like armor, had to face the reality of her choices, not because anyone punished her, but because truth has a way of echoing long after the shouting stops. The first sign of fallout came from within her own social circle. Word spreads quickly in families like ours, where aunties whisper over tea and cousins share stories half in gossip, half in concern. People learned she had skipped her daughter's wedding to attend her younger daughter's boyfriend's birthday party. Photos circulated, her dancing, laughing, drink in hand. No context could soften that image. And sympathy, once abundant for her struggles, began to wither. One aunt told me quietly at a gathering, "Your mom's reputation took a hit. People are talking. They're not on her side this time." I didn't celebrate that, but I also didn't deny the faint, bittersweet sense of closure it brought. Elaine, too, felt the weight of consequences. She confessed during one therapy session that her breakup with her boyfriend had been messier than she initially admitted. "He said I was too absorbed in my mom's approval," she murmured, twisting her bracelet. "He said I didn't know how to prioritize anything else." The irony wasn't lost on her. All her life, she fought to remain the favorite, only to lose the one person whose opinion should have mattered most. I didn't gloat, but I finally understood. Everyone pays a price for dysfunction. Not just the scapegoat. The golden child bleeds too, just silently. My father, long the quiet observer, also began facing his own reckoning. Not through drama, but through the slow realization that neutrality had been its own form of harm. He came to me one afternoon, voice low and earnest. "Riley, I should have protected you more. I let things happen because I didn't want conflict, but avoiding conflict caused it." It was the closest thing to an apology he'd ever given me, and hearing it felt like someone gently resetting a bone that had healed wrong decades ago. But the most profound fallout came from my aunt and uncle. Their decision to maintain the original will, not out of spite, but out of love, sent ripples through the family. My mother no longer fought it. She accepted it, though acceptance came with visible sorrow. Not because she wanted the money, though she once did, but because she finally understood its symbolism. It was the inheritance of the daughter who showed up, the daughter who was present, the daughter who loved them without condition. For me, understanding that wasn't triumph, it was heartbreaking. The kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing the people who raised you loved you more consistently than the people who conceived you. And then came the invitation, the one turning the final piece of fallout into something softer, something healing. My mother asked if Jake and I would consider renewing our vows on our first anniversary. Not a second wedding for show, not a staged performance to appease relatives, but a small, intimate moment with immediate family. A chance to witness the life they missed on the day they chose not to show up. Jake and I talked about it for weeks. We weighed the history, the hurt, the progress we'd seen, and ultimately, we agreed, not for her, but for ourselves, to mark a chapter that felt genuinely different. The ceremony was small, just my parents, Elaine, my aunt, my uncle, and Jake's closest friends. No floral arches, no grand music, no elaborate decor. Just warm lights, soft laughter, and sincerity. I wore a simple ivory dress, nothing like the gown from my wedding day. Jake looked at me with the same steady, adoring eyes as he did on the trail where he first proposed. When I walked toward him, my father at my side, I felt, not erased, not replaced, but recognized. My mother cried openly. Not the performative tears she once wielded to deflect accountability, but the quiet, trembling tears of a woman who knew the cost of the love she almost lost. Elaine hugged me afterward, her voice thick. "You look happy," she whispered. "I am," I said softly, and I meant it. My aunt squeezed my hand. My uncle kissed my forehead. For the first time in my life, my entire family showed up for me, not as a duty, not as a performance, but as a choice. The fallout had reshaped us, broken what needed breaking, left cracks where light could finally enter. And standing there with Jake's fingers intertwined with mine, I realized the most unexpected truth of all. Sometimes the consequences don't destroy a family. They rebuild it, piece by painful piece. Healing rarely arrives in a single moment. It doesn't walk through the door with fanfare or announce itself with triumph. It comes quietly, in soft, unspoken shifts, in small gestures that mean, "I'm trying now, even if I should have tried sooner." The months after our vow renewal felt like living inside a slow sunrise. Light returning inch by inch, not blinding, not perfect, but warm, steady, honest. My mother continued therapy, not for me, but for herself. She learned to untangle decades of guilt she'd buried so deep it hardened into defensiveness. And for the first time, she offered me something I'd never received from her before: consistent effort. My father learned to speak up, even when it was uncomfortable, especially then. He apologized not with grand gestures, but with presence, showing up to family sessions, asking about my life, choosing engagement over silence. Elaine and I rebuilt our relationship brick by fragile brick. There were awkward lunches, tearful conversations, new boundaries, and unexpected laughter, the kind sisters are supposed to share. We stopped competing, stopped performing, started seeing each other for who we actually were, beneath years of imbalance. As for me, I didn't become whole overnight. Childhood wounds have long shadows, but I finally stepped out of them. I learned that choosing myself wasn't betrayal, it was liberation. Jake supported every step, never rushing my healing, never diminishing it. His steady love was the reminder I needed. I was worthy all along. Not because of accomplishments, not because of perfection, but simply because I existed. The biggest lesson, the one I hope every viewer carries with them, is this. You cannot control whether your family chooses you, but you can choose yourself. And sometimes, when you finally do, the people around you learn how to choose you too. Healing isn't about rewriting the past. It's about creating a future where the pain doesn't get to be the narrator anymore. On our first anniversary, as Jake and I exchanged vows again, simple, gentle, intentional, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the survivor, the cycle breaker, the woman who learned to build a life rooted in love that actually stayed. And as my family stood watching, their faces soft with sincerity, I understood one final truth. Sometimes the most powerful story isn't the one where you are loved perfectly, but the one where you learn to love yourself enough to demand something better.